Species. Unite.
I'd call the EATS Act a poison pill, because really what it is if it ever gets inserted in the Farm Bill, or if it gets passed on its own, it prevents all of the animal-centered organizations, all the environmental organizations, all the family farm and rural community organizations that push back against factory farming. It wipes out all of the progress that they've made.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you like today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This conversation is with Erin Cohen. Erin is the Senior Director of Advocacy at Farm Sanctuary. I asked Erin to come on the show today because I wanted to talk about some really important things happening in our government right now. The first is the delayed passage of the Farm Bill, which is a package of legislation that has an enormous impact on farming livelihoods, how food is grown, what kind of foods are grown. It funds our food and agricultural systems. And the other is the EATS Act, which is the Ending Agricultural Trade Suppression Act. If the EATS Act is passed, it could have serious implications for animal welfare and for every ounce of progress that the animal protection movement has made in our food system. It could also have a huge effect on farmer well-being, on worker safety, the spread of zoonotic diseases, and pollution. Hi, Erin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start by talking about Farm Sanctuary. Will you give us some background on what Farm Sanctuary is and what Farm Sanctuary does?
Farm Sanctuary is the first farmed animal sanctuary in the United States. It was co-founded in 1986 by Gene Bauer. And then funding a farmed animal sanctuary in 1986 by selling vegan hot dogs outside of Grateful Dead concerts. One of my favorite images from that early time at Farm Sanctuary is while Gene was selling those vegan hot dogs, it was in front of a banner that read, "Dedicated to ending factory farming." And I think about that moment where rescue and education and advocacy was all happening together. And really, 37 years later, Farm Sanctuary is doing the exact same thing. We're doing rescue, education, and advocacy to end factory farming and support more just, sustainable, compassionate food systems that work for everybody, animals, people, and the planet.
I've been to Farm Sanctuary, the one in New York, the original one. The place is magical.
It's a wonderful place to go with the rolling green hills and the Finger Lakes. And then you put on top of that the intense sort of community that you can feel with these amazing animals who don't get to show off their awe-inspiring talents.
There's 2 farm sanctuaries, right?
Yep, the other one's right outside of LA.
Talk about what else happens at Farm Sanctuary.
We do quite a bit of research, education, and advocacy to change hearts, minds, and systems for the animals, and then because our well-being is all connected, people and the planet. My role as Senior Director of Advocacy is to think about how do we use policy and how do we develop other interventions to shift resources away from factory farming and support more just, sustainable, plant-based food systems that nourish everyone without harming anyone. Because right now we're doing quite a poor job at both of those.
Right now, in 2023, 2 major things that are going on are the Farm Bill and the EATS Act. That's the 2 things I really want to talk about today. For people who just know nothing about the Farm Bill, tell us what it is and then where we are.
The Farm Bill is the main way in which we, as the federal government, fund the food and agricultural system in the United States. It's only passed twice a decade, once every 5 years. And that's because the big ag lobbyists don't want to have to win their battle every year and fight in public, because essentially what they're doing is funding millionaire landowners and billionaire corporate consolidators at the expense of the rest of us. 75% of it is actually totally necessary, extremely important nutrition support that helps millions of families get access to the food that they need. So, for example, we're talking amidst a potential government shutdown, and we've learned that the women, infants, and children food work. So all of the monies that are used to support pregnant mothers, new mothers, and their families, that could run out 2 days into a government shutdown. So this is really necessary nutrition support to feed families. And that kind of goes in the underused resources bucket within the greater Farm Bill conversation. There's also a bunch of misused resources. And that's where we get into this idea that we are funding big ag and big farmers to grow food that doesn't even nourish people. We grow more corn than any other crop as supported by the Farm Bill, and 85 to 90% of that corn isn't used to nourish people. It's used to feed animals, and it's used to create ethanol, an unsustainable, unnecessary biofuel. And so what we focus on is how do we use plants and plant-based foods within that nutrition support work to better feed families? And then how do we shift some of this giant government waste away from the millionaires and the billionaires to support healthy families, farmers, and communities through plants and plant-based foods in a way that's great for all of us?
How does that happen?
It happens in small and incremental ways, and also really big and transformative ways, right? So one of the small and incremental ways that we've been pushing for is why not have it be that anyone who's on SNAP, we used to call them food stamps back in the 1970s, but that's the main nutrition assistance in the United States, and it goes via credit card. Why is it that someone who's using SNAP at the cash register can't have 30% cash back for every dollar that they spend on fruits and vegetables? Massachusetts ran a pilot. They said it's great. Secretary Vilsack of the United States Department of Agriculture said this is an amazing evidence-based solution. And we have smaller programs that have implemented this on a state-by-state basis. But no matter who you are and no matter where you shop, whether it's a farmer's market or a grocery store, you should be able to be rewarded for choosing healthy foods to nourish your family. So that's like kind of a small incremental way that we can push those underused resources to be better used. We can put a cap on the debt that borrowers can take out, because right now 52% of the debt within the farm credit system is going to the top 1% of borrowers. We can limit, put a cap on the amount of subsidies that farmers can get, because right now 70% of the farm subsidies are going to the top 7% of farmers. So there are these little incremental things that we can work on, and which we can build shared agreement around within the current Congress. But I've been around, food systems for a little over a decade now, and the big problem is we keep having the same Farm Bill conversation every 5 years.
Talk about subsidies and how do we get to subsidizing plant-based alternatives and more vegetables, et cetera?
Right now, we have the big commodity crops, they're called corn, soy, wheat, sorghum, cotton, and sugar. Those receive basically all of the subsidies. And so if you're wondering why is everything made out of high fructose corn syrup, or why do we have corn in our tires, or why do we have corn in our gasoline, it's because most of what we're growing is corn. And with both corn and soy, which makes up, again, far more than every other commodity crop on that list combined, they're supporting animal feed for factory farms. So they're making factory farms cheaper. And then they're supporting fuel crops, these ethanol crops and biofuels that are totally unnecessary for a clean energy transition. So we are spending on a quote unquote good year, like $18 to $20 billion on these subsidies. And on a bad year, like $45 billion a year on these subsidies. And it's a total waste, right? None of it is going directly to nourish people. And the farmers on the other side of it are millionaire landowners with a higher median income and net worth than the average person. and billionaire corporate consolidators who gobble up all of the revenues that should be going to farmers, should be going to workers, should be going to local communities, and increasing your prices at the grocery store in the meantime.
And for something like this, and how do you shift subsidies? Like, how do you create change here?
A lot of it is around getting into the specific insurance systems and trying to change eligibility requirements. So that might mean making farmers eligible for a wider variety of crops. So, for example, the whole farm insurance program is available in every county in the United States, and it's actually designed for diversified farms and predominantly quote unquote specialty crop farms, those fruits and vegetables and other crops that directly nourish people. The problem is it's a deeply unfunded program compared to the 20 billion to 40 billion that the big guys are getting. So a big part of it is shifting funds away from the big commodity crop insurance programs towards these better vehicles that are already designed to support smaller and mid-sized farms and farms that are growing foods that directly nourish people.
What's happening right now with Farm Bill?
It's getting delayed over and over again because Washington can't seem to figure out how to fund itself, much less fund its food and farm system. So we were told at one point that the goal was to have a new farm bill reauthorized October 1st. Senator Stabenow in Michigan, the kind of key Democratic leader on the Agriculture Committee, has said that she'd like to see a new farm bill by the end of the year. And so right now what's happening is you've got a bunch of infighting happening among Republicans inside the House, because a lot of Republicans actually don't like this government waste just as much as I do. The problem is they've got a few big ag state representatives and senators who are saying like, hey, if you don't fund the millionaire landowners and the billionaire consolidators that operate in our states, we're going to be out of work in this next election cycle. You've got to, help these special interests to help us keep our jobs. So there's that Republican infighting that's happening. And then there's always a balance, and sometimes it's referred to as like a union between farmers and families, right? The Farm Bill is helping the farmers and it's helping the families. But really what's happening is the farmers and the families are both being kind of held hostage by the big ag interests. It's a question of how much do we want to cut from the nutrition assistance in order to support the big ag folks. And so that's what they're kind of deciding on and negotiating right now. And just to give you some context as well, we are deeply concerned that the Farm Bill debate is going to both go under the radar, not see a big public discussion, but also get dragged out potentially through the next election cycle. I think you could see happening with the Farm Bill exactly what happened with the Supreme Court at the end of the Obama administration and the beginning of the Trump administration, where Mitch McConnell said, hey, we're not going to pass a Supreme Court nominee because we want to see if we're going to win an election. And then we ended up with a Republican Supreme Court and the tragedies that have followed that. I am, deeply concerned that we're going to have the same thing happen with the Farm Bill, where they're going to say, hey, we don't need to pass a Farm Bill until we see what happens with the election. And if Donald Trump were elected president again, he would have the ability to write 2 Farm Bills in a row. And it would be an absolute disaster for the country.
Will you explain what the EATS Act is and just how scary it is?
So we framed the Farm Bill in terms of underused resources and misused resources. I'd call the EATS Act a poison pill, because really what it is if it ever gets inserted in the Farm Bill or if it gets passed on its own, it prevents all of the animal-centered organizations, all the environmental organizations, all the family farm and rural community organizations that push back against factory farming. It wipes out all of the progress that they've made. Critical progress, by the way, keeping cancerous known carcinogens out of our food, right? Like that is how far we're going in terms of wiping reforms away. What they're trying to do also specifically is turn back a major victory that we had earlier this year in that same Supreme Court that we were talking about. So for those of you who don't know, California a few years ago passed by popular referendum. 66% of Californians said, hey, we do not want gestation crates or veal crates in our state. We think that is the wrong way to treat animals, and we don't want any product that's sold in the state of California to be coming from a gestation crate or a veal crate. 66% of Californians thought that was a great idea. Of course, the national pork producers did not think that was a good idea, so they sued the state of California. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in a, I would call it surprising and inspiring turn of events, the Supreme Court sided with the group of animal-centered advocates led by the Humane Society of the United States and including Farm Sanctuary, who were standing up for animals, people, and the planet. And the moment the Supreme Court decided that, yes, the state of California has a right to say where its food comes from and how the animals are treated, the moment the Supreme Court said that, the Republicans got to work saying, we have got to prevent this bill from happening. Because when you think about what it's like to live in one of these factory farming states, I live in North Carolina. I'm well aware that I've got 9 million pigs and 900 million chickens as my neighbors. And none of us think, my neighbors who eat meat and my neighbors who don't eat meat, that the food system's working for us. It's only the elected officials who are paid by the corporate interests who think that the food and farm system is working for them. And so within these big agricultural states, there's a lot of grassroots and community level pushback. And the EATS Act is a way of saying none of that grassroots community level pushback matters. The only thing that matters is what we do at the federal level.
Will you talk about the animal welfare issues with this act?
If you think about a factory farm, the goal of a factory farm is to run it as profitably as they can. What that means is putting animals in as confined a place as they can, feeding them food that does not help them, giving them chemicals and pesticides that keep them barely alive so that they can be ready to then be processed into food, right? Like the goal of a factory farm is in some ways to make the animals' lives as unbearable as possible while still keeping them alive. And when we're talking about what are welfare reforms, it means giving the animals a little bit of freedom, a little bit of ability to move around, to interact as beings, to live their very short lives in less pain and less emotional anguish. And so whether that means removing a gestation crate, which is a mother pig who's put in such tight constraints that she can't move to the left or to the right, whether it's removing veal crates, right? A way of taking a baby calf away from their mother, causing immense emotional pain to that mother, and then putting them directly into a crate for their entire life. These are the kinds of basic reforms that 8 in 10 Americans, 9 in 10 Americans all say, we want factory farms to be treating animals better. And the EATS Act would take all of those laws off the books.
I know it's not a great chance of this passing, but there's still a chance, right?
Absolutely, there's a chance. I think that we have to be prepared rather than surprised. And so as an animal-centered movement and as folks who are working with farmers in rural communities all across the country, I've been really impressed by how prepared we've been for this fight. And we need your help. Folks like hearing from farmers in rural communities and a little less from folks like me, but I'll tell you who in Congress they love hearing from is you. And so if you're listening to this and you're saying the EATS Act can't pass, then Congress needs to hear you believe that. I deeply encourage you to reach out to Congress and let your voice be heard.
What's the conversation that's going on about all this in your work?
We as a vegan movement, we as an animal-centered movement have in a lot of successful ways been able to mainstream concerns about factory farming. 8 in 10, 9 in 10 Americans, when asked via survey whether or not they think factory farms are operating with the interests of animals, people, or the planet in mind, consistently say no. But the problem is they currently think, oh, but we need factory farming and industrial agriculture in order to feed each other or quote unquote feed the world. And that is the furthest thing from the case. But what we have to do as farm sanctuary, as an animal-centered movement, as a vegan movement, is start to mainstream the solutions, the ways in which we can build the good for families, farmers, communities, animals, people, and the planet, and use plants and plant-based foods to do it. So part of my job is to reach out to these local stakeholders, local community groups who are harmed by factory farming and help them speak to a Washington, D.C. that very rarely listens to them. But another big part of my job is to hear on the other side, okay, after we're done pushing back against this really horrifying thing, how do we start feeding each other in a way that's more compassionate, more sustainable, more equitable?
How do we?
I think that we're seeing three kind of big approaches emerge. Number one, we need a big shift in agricultural land use away from animal feed and fuel crops to support dietary fiber crops, right? Fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. So that's one big transition that we need to see. And that would help, frankly, the family farms out in Iowa who are getting pushed out by the millionaire landowners who are predominantly actually in Manhattan. That's the crazy thing, right? We've got Manhattan lawyers and accountants and financiers buying Iowa farmland to grow food that doesn't nourish people. So that's one big land use shift that we need to see. We also have heard quite a bit of support around how do we get more plant-based and plant-centered meals inside of schools, child and adult care facilities, hospitals. You know, you've got more money in the school food system as a country than we have in the entire farm insurance system in an average year. And so we have this huge bucket of money that we're not using well enough. And I should say part of the problem with these conversations is school food isn't even included in the farm bill, right? They took that one out. And then I think a big part of it too has to do with how we reward or do not reward sustainability, right? And so we right now have allowed all of the carbon credit systems and all of the sustainability systems to essentially be co-opted by factory farms, whether it's within EQIP, where that's a special part of the farm bill that is supports conservation efforts for farmers, right? A lot of that EQIP funding, 30 to 40% of it, is helping factory farmers clean up their own mess. It's a big issue. And so whether it's on that conservation funding side within the farm bill, or with who's allowed to decide whether or not something is an environmentally sustainable transition, right? Like the most greenhouse gas intensive form of food production on the planet is animal agriculture. But right now, if a factory farmer, if an animal farmer wanted to switch from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture, they would not be rewarded for the carbon credits. But they would be rewarded if they just made their own animal agriculture stuff slightly more efficient, right? It's crazy. And so we have to think about some of these land shifts within our food system, some of these infrastructure shifts within our food system. But then we also have to just get a better hold of being more consistent around, if we're going to compensate, farmers for being sustainable, that's great. But we should make sure that they're actually sustainable. And we should make sure that we're not, ultimately sending a bunch of money to help factory farmers be slightly better at factory farming.
During COVID, the world got up front and up close and up front views of all the gigantic gaping holes in our food system. So it felt like it was a big opportunity for breakthroughs and changes. Did anything come out of seeing all the horror shows that was happening in the food system during the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is, I think folks across the country and even some of our elected officials are starting to better understand and better prioritize food. When I first got started in food system work 10 plus years ago, the only thing anyone ever wanted to talk about was obesity. And then the only thing anyone ever wanted to talk about was quote unquote food deserts. And the problem with both of those things is it put the problem on the individual or the individual communities, right? It said, what's wrong with you all? Why can't you nourish yourselves properly? And what we started to realize is, they can't nourish themselves properly because we have these big systemic structural issues. So I think number one, the fact that we collectively seem to have better recognized that we have a problem and that the problems of how to nourish ourselves are directly connected to the problems associated with how we grow and process and distribute our food. I think that's a major breakthrough in and of itself. But then I think about, when the COVID pandemic hit, I was actually still working as a local food system consultant in Durham, North Carolina, where, my amazing bosses completely restructured our business model to connect farmers, families in need, and schools. And what we did during that time period was reinvest $2.5 million into the local producer economy, serving 1.5 million meals in 7 months. And that's more than twice what the entire state of North Carolina did on an annual basis with farm to school work. And we did that in one mid-sized city in North Carolina during a pandemic. So I think we've also started to realize that, yes, there are a ton of needs and a ton of problems associated with our food system, but we actually need to take a resource-based approach, an asset-based approach, and realize that we have so much money, so much technical capacity, so many social networks working in food. We just need to shift those resources to better support animals, people, and the planet. We actually know how to do it. We just have to choose to do it.
How do we choose to do it? Why aren't we doing this?
It's in part a result of some of the vegan and animal-centered tactics that we've seen over the last 20 years, in my opinion. I think that we have been a movement that has focused too much on being ethically or morally correct in everything that we do individually, taking action on our plates, and not prioritizing meeting folks where they are, learning from each other, and saying, hey, no matter why you support plants and plant-based foods, no matter why you think this is a good idea, I'm here to understand, I'm here to work with you, and I'm here to say that, by the way, I really do believe animals have a ton of value. They have a ton of dignity, and I'm not going to ever forsake my values in this conversation, but I'm going to recognize that you might think we need to transition to a plant-based system because of climate change or because of social justice issues, and that's great. I should see you as my ally. And I think we have both an ethical and a strategic responsibility to advocate for animals, people, and the planet in this kind of holistic way. It's better for the animals. I'm convinced by that. Like, tactically, if the animal and vegan-centered movement were able to elevate food and integrate a concern for animals in factory farming, we would be better off if all we consider is the animal impacts. But also, we should be advocating for animals, people, and the planet because it's the right thing to do. We should care about all of our collective well-being. And compassion shouldn't stop with non-human species. And so I think part of the challenge that we have is to take an animal-centered movement and a vegan movement that's sometimes deeply inward-looking and help us reach out across movements, meet other folks where they are, and elevate food. Because there is no other community in the United States that is better equipped to elevate food than the vegan and animal-centered community. We do it all the day, every day, at the cash register and in our personal lives. And we need to take that action on our plates and bring it to our communities.
I think it's something that so many people think, like, vegans kind of shot themselves in the foot a long time ago in the sense of being really exclusive and really judgmental as a movement, right? And for good reason, because when a lot of people go vegan, they want the whole world to go vegan at the exact same time. And there's a lot of, awakening and pain and all of that involved. But by staying so insular and staying so judgy, it made a lot of people not want to be associated with it. And so people who would probably love plants still don't want to be vegan. They had ripple effect for decades.
Exactly. I saw 2 polls come out back to back. One of them said that 48% of consumers look for the phrase plant-based when they're in the grocery store. And the other one said that 1% of Americans identify as vegan. We have a diet issue in the United States of America, but we also have an issue with being so tied up in the identity and the language and feeling correct in a public conversation, that we are less concerned with being persuasive and doing what's impactful for the animals who we care about.
And I'm sure even from on the political perspective and talking to, Congress people don't want to talk about animals and animal welfare.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say I am pleasantly surprised by how willing they are to have us at the table, just as long as we're not throwing paint at them. They don't necessarily put animals at the front of their platform, but they are willing to have us in the room, and they think that we're representing an important point of view. And that is a sea change from where we were, a decade ago. I think it's really important for us to celebrate that progress, and also to take advantage of having that foot in the door, not by, being a movement that is focused solely and exclusively on quote unquote our issues, but by taking advantage of being in the room to talk about exactly what you said, the climate, the public health, the rural vitality, the farmer issues that so many of these elected officials care about. And if we do that, it is going to make them more sympathetic to animals. I truly believe that when they work with us and they work with other animal advocates who take this kind of meet you where you are approach, and they work with us over time, they start to hear and realize the benefits and realities of animals in a new way. And they come around, right? I think it's amazing that we have the Ro Khannas and Bookers and Blumenauers in a bipartisan animal caucus that's more than 40 elected officials across Congress. It's amazing, right? And so I definitely see a lot of long-term hope around will elected officials care about animals in the future. But it's just important when we're talking about politics to live in the present.
Well, Aaron, thank you for all the work you do.
It's my pleasure. And I know these issues can be complicated, so I'd encourage y'all to reach out to our farm sanctuary team. We're currently building ways to get more folks involved in this process, because I think for a long time, a lot of folks have felt like they cared about these issues. They've wanted to get more involved, but they haven't known how best to do it. And so we want to be a door for that education, that learning. And no matter where you are with your own dietary journey, we hope that you will consider coming to us when you're thinking about how to take action in your communities for animals, people, and the planet.
Cool. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
To learn more about Aaron, to learn more about the EATS Act and the Farm Bill and Farm Sanctuary, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. If you would like to support the podcast, we'd greatly appreciate it. Go to our website, speciesunite.com, and click donate. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke, Ayana Peoples, Olivia Deming, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.